Hello and welcome to Faithfully Stampin' with Jennifer Helm. I am Jennifer Helm, the Faithful Stamper and independent demonstrator with Stampin' Up! I have for you an interesting technique for this card today. It's an old one that I learned many years ago. It was actually something I taught in one of the first workshops that I taught once I became a demonstrator and decided to hold my own classes. And it's a fun technique because it's something people don't think of. It's stamping, but it's a different kind of stamping. The background here of this panel is actually done with rubber bands on a clear block and ink. It's that simple. So for this card, you're going to need some clear blocks and rubber bands of various sizes. You can use these thin ones, you can use thicker ones, you can even use the teeny tiny ones if you've got these little, I call them hair rubber bands, but these itty bitty ones will work as well. They're great for small blocks for different patterns. So experiment with the size of rubber bands and you'll get a different look every time you do a card like this. So we're going to start with our stamping tonight and I'll show you how this technique works. So I'm bringing some scrap paper over because I'm going to of my panel. I'm using basic white that is 5 inches tall by 3 3/4 inches wide. And when you put your rubber bands on your blocks, all you have to do is make sure they're as flat as possible. Now with the thicker rubber bands, it's easier to keep them flat. When you move into the thinner rubber bands like this, try to keep them flat, but because they're so narrow, sometimes they want to twist. These little guys are kind of a pain in the tush because they just want to twist all over the place, but try your best. Now, a couple words of caution. First of all, you might want to have a paper towel or a baby wipe handy because you will get a little bit inky, more than likely. I don't look too bad yet, but this morning I managed to have yellow ink on the back of my knuckles. I don't even know how I did that, and I'm right-handed, so how I got ink over here, I don't know. But you'll get a little inky, and some of that is because your block will get inky. I can see I've got a little bit of purple here. So normally with a stamp, you have a little more height on your block. Because you have rubber bands that are thin and narrow, especially these little babies, you don't have a lot of room here to get ink just on the rubber band. You're probably going to end up with some on the block. So you might want to have a tissue handy to blot that off, or just be a little bit careful. You want to try to stamp as level as possible. Sometimes it's not the end of the world if you get a little extra ink on a background like this, but depending on the look you're going for, you might not want that. So I am using 3 colors of ink. I have Smoky Slate, Crushed Curry, and Blackberry Bliss. It's up to you how many colors you use. You could use 2, you could use 6. Totally up to you what you want your project to look like. So I'm going to start with, let me see. I think I'm going to start with these rubber bands and my Smoky Slate ink. So all I'm going to do is take my block with my rubber band and stamp on my ink pad, trying to keep my block as level as possible so I don't get ink where I don't want it on the block. And I will admit this is tricky. And you can see here, your rubber band might get stained depending on the colors you're using, but that's okay. As long as you clean it off in between colors, you won't have any transfer to your new ink pad. One thing you can do that is neat with this technique is you can stamp again and again and get impressions with your stamps. So for example, I'm going to stamp here and then I'm just going to keep stamping around until I run out of ink, and then I'm just going to stamp again. Now you can see here I got a little bit of line from my block. That's okay. It's actually, that's going to be covered up with the design that I'm working on tonight, so it's not the end of the world. But that's what I was talking about with extra ink from the block that you might not necessarily want there. And so you can just have fun stamping all over, and really you get a lot of mileage out of ink on a rubber band. You wouldn't think that. I don't know that I would get that many impressions with a regular stamp, stamping this many times. You definitely do get impressions if you stamp off and stamp repeatedly, but I feel like the rubber bands hold a little more ink. So I'm done with the smoky slate. I'm going to switch to crushed curry, and I'm going to switch to a different block with rubber bands on it. And let's see. I usually have one side where the rubber bands are relatively flat and one where they're a little more twisted on the back, because I only fight with one side. And so again, I'm just going to ink up my stamp and then move it around. And you can keep going until you're happy with how your project looks here. I think, whoop. I'm gonna add one more color and then I'll call that good enough. So you can start with dark colors, you can start with light colors and then add in the dark, totally up to you. I'm gonna use this little bitty stamp here. This one cracks me up because I sort of inadvertently made it look like a dragonfly. And this one looks a little bit like that too. But you definitely have a more geometric look with this kind of block technique, just because of the nature of putting rubber bands on a block. But it works, and you're going to have a different panel every single time that you do this technique, because really you're going all over the paper. You're never going to get the same design more than once. All right, so this panel looks totally different than any other one that I've made today using this technique, and that's great. I love it. All right, so I think that's good there. I'm going to set this to the side for a minute and do one last little bit of stamping. I do want to put a sentiment on my card, so I'm going to add a little sentiment strip, and I'm going to use Blackberry Bliss on my Smoky Slate cardstock and just stamp like so. There we go. Now this is 3/8 of an inch tall. I started with a piece that was 1/2 inch and it was too much space, so I cut it down a little bit to 3/8 of an inch. And what I'm going to do, I could just put it on the card like this, but I like it to have a little, sometimes I like it to have a little more character. So I'm just going to nip the edges off with my scissors to give it an angle. And it just changes the look a little bit. So to finish this card, we're going to start assembly. I have a card base that is 4 1/4 by 11. It is scored at 5 1/2. You can use whatever style card base you want, though. You do not have to use the long skinny kind. This works both ways with the other half sheet of cardstock as well. So next up, I'm going to put a cardstock layer on top, which is 5 1/4 by 4. This is crushed curry. I just decided this morning what cards or what colors I was going to use, and then just picked my cardstock and my ink from there. There is no designer series paper on any of these cards I'm going to show you today. So this layer gets centered right on the front, like this. Now, here's another little trick. This is something I always forget to do when I'm working on a project, and I even could do it with a solid color panel. It doesn't just necessarily have to be done with a stamped panel, because what I'm going to do is cut a circle out of this panel to then put on the card once I finish adding some layers. It's just a material saving step, and it's something I honestly forget to do more often than not. So take a circle punch or any kind of punch, a die cut if you don't have a punch, and aim for the middle. You don't want it, you want to have an idea of where on the paper you want to punch. I know that I'm going to put some layers on, but I wouldn't want to have it too close to the bottom here where I couldn't cover it up. So I kind of target the middle, but you have a little bit of room to maneuver. You can see if there's one area you like better than others here. And let's see. You can also decide which way you want your paper to go when you have a mostly geometric print that you're dealing with. So now that I've punched my circle out, I'm just going to lay that to the side and go back to my adhesive and my layering. So a little adhesive around the edges. This is just our Stampin' Seal. I don't need fancy adhesive for this. And let's see. I think I like it this way. This just gets centered on that layer. Next, I'm going to take a strip of Blackberry Bliss. I always have to say that slowly because it's a tongue twister for me. This is 1 1/4 inches tall by 3 3/4 inches wide. It's the same width as my basic white panel. And I chose to layer almost everything on the card flat. Now you are welcome to add some layers with dimension. It's up to you. And you have maneuverability here with your pieces. Play around with whatever design you like. I'm going to lay my strip here and cover up the bottom of that circle to make sure that doesn't peek through. Next, I'm going to add some crushed curry. This is 2 inches wide by 4 1/4 inches tall. And again, more adhesive. So this is just a fun technique for something different to do for your cards. This would be great for a project to work with little ones because you don't have to break out your stamp sets. You can just break out some rubber bands and some clear blocks and go to town. Even if you have wood blocks, if you don't have the clear blocks, wood blocks you have laying around the house would work too. So last but not least, for my layers, I have a piece of cardstock that is 2 1/4 inches by 3 inches. Now this is smoky slate, and I embossed it with my Hive 3D embossing folder. So it does not have to be embossed. If you don't have any embossing folders, don't worry. You could just stick with plain cardstock. I just wanted something with a little texture. And I have a tendency to overkill with my adhesive when I'm dealing with embossed panels. I always have this fear that they're going to pull off my card. And so I put a little bit of extra adhesive on there so I can give it a really good press and make sure it's not going to peel off my card. And sometimes I get adhesive stuck to my fingers. So pardon me for a moment because that'll cause me problems later. All right, there we go. Now I can take that circle that I punched out and put a little adhesive on the back of this and decide where I want this on my card front. I could have put this on with dimensionals, but I'm choosing to lay it flat. And you could position this wherever you want on the card. See, I think I'll put it there. Again, just press down. And that leaves me with my sentiment strip. And I'm just going to put this on with dimensionals. I could glue it flat, but I want to put a little bit of height on the card. So my mini dimensionals are perfect for such a narrow strip of paper. Just need to peel the backing off. And then decide where to position this. Again, you have some freedom to experiment where you might want that on the card. And let's see, I think I'll do up here. Just like this. And that is my finished card. And here's a quick peek. These are 2 other samples that I made using the same colors, and they're different. Every single one of these is different in positioning or just overall pattern. So you can do a lot of these cards pretty quickly and they'll all look different. So now I have a couple samples for you to see, because you don't just have to use a panel and cut a piece out to make a card. You can use this technique and experiment with it. So for this card, I only used the design around the edge. I kind of had in mind what I wanted to do, and I knew I had this focal point with the record, which is popped up on dimensionals. And so I just picked my colors, and I used wider rubber bands here, and you can see I got lots of mileage out of Stampin' Off with my ink and the rubber bands, and just stamped until I was happy with how it looked. So there's one idea for you. Next up, I have another idea where instead of stamping all over or even just along the side, I stamped on one portion of the card. It's not even quite half. And how I created this look here, I took a large Post-it note on my panel of white and I laid it on my work surface like this. So basically I used that Post-it note as a mask. I took my clear blocks with my rubber bands and stamped on this side until I was happy. And you can see here I used some of the smaller rubber bands. Like this one has, I think, 7 on it. I probably could have squeezed in 12 if I put them a little closer together. But I stamped with those, came back with, and these are in Rich Razzleberry, and then I used Mint Macaron as well with some longer rubber bands. And then when I was happy with how that looked just with the stamping, I came back with my blending brush in Mint Macaron, and I just swirled some color on until I was happy. And then I took the Post-it note away, and that left me with this beautiful panel. So it almost looks like I created my own DSP. And then I went on with my regular stamp set and stamped here on this side. So you really have a lot of options to play here. And you also don't have to use it on a panel of a card. You could use it on a smaller portion of a card. Here is my last sample for today, where I took a 2 1/4 inch square, I believe it was, and I just used one rubber band and stamped different ink colors. So it was one thicker rubber band, which I don't have handy at the moment, but it was something similar to this, where I just inked it up in the Melon Mambo and stamped, then came back with Pumpkin Pie and stamped some more, then Mango Melody. I think I even came back again with the Melon Mambo and created this panel here. Then I stamped in Memento Black on with the palm trees. Added some colors to kind of keep it all together and some ribbon, and here is a fun little birthday card. Not too complicated, just keeping those colors going and with a really neat background piece. So you have lots of options for using this quick and simple rubber band technique. So I hope you enjoyed learning a little something different for your card making skills. It's just another skill to add to your repertoire. If you have not already, I would love for you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. You can click the notification bell and then you will be notified whenever I post a video here, which is typically twice a week. You can also find me on Facebook as The Faithful Stamper. I do Facebook Live videos there, talk about some workshops and specials and other fun things that are going on with Stampin' Up! So I'd love to have you visit me there as well. Thank you so much for watching. Take care and happy crafting.